The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. Inside the small Akron apartment on Carnegie Avenue, Byron Claflin's voice stayed sharp, and Linda Pagano kept moving down the hallway with her jacket in her hands. She was 17 and tired, and the fight had already gone on too long. Claflin was telling her she came in whenever she wanted, that she thought she was grown. Linda shot back that she'd been out with her boyfriend, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that she wasn't a little kid. The argument tightened until there was nowhere left to put it. According to Claflin, he threw her out. Linda stepped away without her car, without anything packed, and without any idea it would be the last time her family would see her alive. Linda Marie Pagano was the youngest of 3 children. She went to Springfield High in Akron and worked after school at an A&W in Tallmadge. People who knew her described her as honest and shy, the kind of teenager who showed up for her shift and didn't cause trouble. In the summer of 1974, Linda and her siblings were living with their stepfather, Byron Claflin, in his apartment. Family members later said Claflin drank and had a temper, but Linda was not known as a chronic runaway. On August 31st, Linda and her boyfriend, Steve Wilson, went to a Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young concert in Cleveland. When it ended, they drove back toward Akron. In the early hours of September 1st, Linda dropped Wilson off and drove to Claflin's apartment. After that, everything the police had for her last moments came from Claflin's account. He said she came in late, they argued, and she left the apartment on foot. Linda's Mustang stayed behind. In the days that followed, the family tried to make sense of a silence that didn't fit Linda. Linda was last seen wearing blue jeans and a dark-colored sweater, a small detail that stayed fixed, even as everything else blurred. The strongest location clue in the record was that she left from Claflin's apartment and never returned. Months later, when the Strongsville remains were documented, investigators noted the sandbar on the east bank of the Rocky River near Eastland Road. But the distance between Akron and that spot offered no simple explanation. At first, they assumed she was staying with friends, cooling off, waiting for the argument to blow over. When she didn't call and didn't come home, they reported her missing. The case gained little attention. Officers were working from the assumption that a teenager had run off, and there was no wave of headlines to force urgency. Linda's face wasn't on every television set. Her name didn't become a citywide alarm. She was just gone. Michael Pagano, Linda's brother, carried the feeling that something worse had happened. He remembered what she was like at home, how she spoke when she was upset, and how she still checked in. He watched for anything that might point back to her, and in February 1975, he saw a television report about skeletal remains found in Strongsville. The details were vague, but the word female and the timing were enough to make his stomach drop. He called to suggest the remains might be Linda. He was told the victim was too old and likely too tall, and the lead died on the phone. The bones had been found on February 5, 1975, by 3 boys hiking in what is now the Millstream Run Reservation along the Rocky River in Strongsville. They spotted parts of a skeleton and ran for help. Investigators searched the area but recovered only partial remains. The skeleton was incomplete and badly degraded, including a missing jawbone. No clothing or personal effects at the scene gave a name. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide from a gunshot wound to the head. For a brief time, the case even brushed up against national news when investigators considered whether the remains could be connected to Patty Hearst, kidnapped in 1974, but it was quickly clear the Jane Doe was someone else. Years later, people close to the case would learn that a clerical error kept the remains from being properly entered into the databases used to track unidentified decedents. The file didn't travel through the system the way it should have. The Strongsville Jane Doe remained nameless, and Linda Pagano remained a missing teenager in Akron, even though the answers were already sitting in the ground. Time moved on in a way the case didn't. Claflin, the last known person to see Linda alive, died in 1990. Steve Wilson, the boyfriend who had been with her hours before she vanished, drifted out of reach of investigators over the years. Michael and Cheryl grew older, without the one thing that would have let them finally set Linda down: certainty. The case resurfaced in 2016 through Christina Skates, a college student doing genealogy research who came across the forgotten record. She realized how little public attention the Jane Doe had ever received and began posting about it online. The renewed interest reached forensic artist Carl Koppelman, who helped push the case into view. Once people started asking why an identified-looking homicide victim still had no name, officials moved to reopen the file and do what had not been done in 1975: use modern DNA comparison. The remains were exhumed from the unmarked grave. Samples were taken and compared with living relatives. The process took time because there was limited material to work with and decades of missing documentation to sort through. Eventually, the testing reached a point that could not be argued. On June 29, 2018, the identification was conclusive. Strongsville Jane Doe was Linda Marie Pagano, missing from Akron since September 1, 1974. On July 12, 2018, the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office announced the match publicly. After 44 years, Linda had her name back. For Linda's family, the announcement hit like a door opening and a door closing at the same time. The years of maybe were over, but the truth they wanted was still missing. Investigators still could not answer who shot her or where she had been between the night she walked away from the apartment and the day her bones were found beside the river in Strongsville. Because the remains were found on Metroparks land, Cleveland Metroparks police handled the investigation. In public updates, law enforcement named 2 people tied to Linda's last known hours: Claflin and Wilson. Wilson was described as a key witness they wanted to locate, and no one was arrested. Linda's remains were returned to her family. The portions of her skeleton that had been recovered were cremated and interred beside her mother at Holy Cross Cemetery in Akron. In January 2019, family and members of the community gathered to remember Linda, a teenager who had left home after an argument and never made it back. The case is no longer buried in an unmarked grave or a forgotten file, but the homicide itself is still unsolved. Whoever pulled the trigger took Linda's future and left her family with decades of unanswered questions. And someone, somewhere, knows what happened after Linda stepped out of that Akron apartment. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.